guys, welcome back to another episode of the Absolute Podcast. And if you're watching this on YouTube as well, I'm your host, Jasmine Templin, and we are here with Coach Shaun Fitzsimmons today. And we are going to be talking about the differences between training a male client versus a female client. And then we've just got a couple questions at the end, which we are going to touch on. We've got a lot of topics to share with you guys as well. So we'll try and keep this short and sweet because we've got plenty more episodes that we're going to dive into every single particular topic. So, Shaun, since you're a bit of a guest on the podcast, even though you've been on the podcast before, I will let you try and kind of lead the way, and we'll just kind of have like a general conversation, nothing too crazy in regards to, our approach when it comes to training our clients and the training differences that we like to do for them.
Definitely. It's good to be back on the podcast. I'm looking forward to going through a few episodes with you and talk about some different stuff, but this is a great one to touch on. And I think I personally believe that because I don't believe there's overly too much big differences between the two. Like we've already talked about this. I suppose there is differences in terms of nutrition, especially through dieting. And I think if you differentiate between like a comp prep or an aggressive dieting phase to just a lifestyle client, then there's I suppose more differences from a comp prep standpoint and aggressive dieting phase there. But other than that, there's not massive differences between the two. But it's always important, I suppose, to really for everybody to understand, I suppose, why we differentiate the sort of aggressive dieting approach, I suppose, to both male and females, to make sure that obviously everybody's functioning at the best they possibly can and they can perform the best they can throughout a training phase. Because I guess obviously both of us obviously take on comp prep clients and do the same, so you'd be exactly the same, wouldn't you? And both of those aspects of both, I suppose, aggressive dieting and trying to manage training fatigue, I suppose, throughout that phase. Hey.
100%.
Yeah, so I suppose the two differences the main difference that I sort of touch on is more just sort of the looking after the fat intake throughout, especially a female's sort of dieting phase. Males, I can be a bit more aggressive in bringing their fats that little bit lower. Females, I try to keep them that little bit higher. I have a certain sort of threshold that I work with and trying to go too far under that. If I can keep the fats a bit higher in a female client throughout a dieting phase, I will. And that just more aids in proper hormone production as well too, and function, I suppose, throughout that phase. And that it also comes from a lot of experience as well too. When you first start off as a sort of like a comp prep coach, definitely don't seem to, I suppose, pay as much attention to these things because you haven't been through it before. The more and more, I suppose, you go through different phases and see how people, I suppose, adapt and, or I suppose, manage fatigue, then that's where you sort of start to realize as a coach, I suppose, the differences in managing fatigue and someone to be able to perform throughout that whole entire comp prep phase. So essentially, that's probably the biggest difference I would put between the two. As a male, I can be a bit more aggressive in running their fats a little bit lower, keeping the carbohydrates a bit higher, because quite commonly, again, in my experience, I find if I can keep someone's carbohydrates a bit higher, they're able to perform better in the gym throughout their comp prep phase, which therefore we have the ability to then maintain, obviously, higher or potential, maintain, I suppose, muscle mass throughout a comp prep phase rather than, that suffering in the back end, performance goes down, and we're at a higher risk of obviously going catabolic and losing muscle at the back end. And obviously, us as bodybuilders want to try and avoid that as much as we can. I take this approach though in lifestyle clients too. Like I have the same threshold with females as well. Throughout someone who just wants to go through a dieting phase, especially someone getting into the back end of the end of the dieting phase. We need to make sure that, again, same sort of procedures come into place there. But again, because it's not aggressive and we could probably take more diet breaks, we could potentially implement multiple refeeds throughout a week as well to help negate this. And we don't have a specific end date, then it's probably not as big of a thing, but I still have those sort of same procedures in place. But otherwise, from a dieting point of view, we always have the difference between obviously how much protein we put in place for both male and female clients. Again, I work off more of a range as such, again, coming from of experience as well too, with both my male and female clients with protein, and the carbohydrates are pretty much just left out to sort of fill in the blanks almost. We want to try and always have as much carbohydrates as possible, again, to aid in training performance throughout any phase, throughout a dieting phase, and also obviously through when we're going through a surplus to try and obviously build muscle as much as we can. The more carbohydrates, the more potential we have to perform better in the gym and obviously to grow and build the shape that we're trying to achieve. So in terms of the differences, I believe that's my main difference between the two. Would you say the same, Jasmine, or is that slightly different from your
Yeah,
side of things?
no, 100%, especially the higher fats in females is definitely important. And, you see a lot of people go really low fats, like 15, 20 grams, which, even for a small 50-kilo female is extremely low. And you could only imagine how tough that would be, especially if they're on that quite early out, and how much they would be struggling hormonally and then having to bounce back after that as well. And then you see a lot of like digestive issues happen as well, after, coming out of a comp prep and their body readjusting as well to that again. But 100%, and keeping those fats high is definitely going to be the most optimal thing that we can do when it comes to athlete performance, and having as positive as experience as we can. But yeah, that's probably our main differences when it comes to nutrition. And now when it comes to training as well, and our approach, and I know we kind of briefly heard about this off air as well, and that is, the fact that our training isn't too different when it comes to male and female clients. It, of course, just depends on terms of their, what muscle groups that they want to do focus on, the volume that we like to spread that across different muscle groups as well. What would you say your main differences is there with training?
A lot of it comes down to the individual. And most females come to me with, I suppose, similar goals, I suppose, in terms of what they want their shape to look like. But so do males at the same time. And in a slightly funny way, I think a lot of the time they're very similar in the way that they both want to achieve sort of certain goals. Like, I think I mentioned this to you yesterday. We had a laugh about it. It's like males don't specifically come to you and say, "Hey, I want to grow my glutes," but at the same time, they don't want to have average glutes either. They want to have a flat bum, do they? So at the same time, it's the physique that we're trying to achieve is very similar. It's just where we, I suppose, like push the volume towards. Most guys come to me saying, "Hey, Shaun, I want to have a pretty decent sized chest and some bigger arms." So we normally always push that little bit more, volume towards, I suppose, the arms and the chest area. Where again, obviously, throughout a female, we quite commonly don't really need to push as much volume towards, I suppose, the pec region or the chest, purely for the fact that we'll put the emphasis more towards, I suppose, the shoulders and the back, I suppose, around the sort of female sort of clients. But again, still need to take them through that sort of range of motion. That's not quite commonly where I would incorporate more of an incline press. In some cases, also some flyers and everything as well too. But again, it's more just comes down to the individual's goals at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So most of the time, or so most commonly, that I have my girls more wanting to sort of maybe sort of hit a little more frequency towards glutes and hamstrings and quads, which is completely fine. I suppose a lot of guys don't have smaller legs either, but it's just more what someone comes to you and says they sort of want to put the focus towards.
Yeah.
I'll look at their physique after they send through some photos. I'll sort of see areas where I believe that we could sort of really push up as well too. Again, especially if it's I suppose bodybuilding specific, we need to make sure that they are looking their absolute best on the day. We know exactly what we're looking for, what the judges are going to be looking for on the day too. So we need to make sure that the volume that we push towards certain areas is going to make them look their best on the day and have the best opportunity to do well at the same time. But this day and age, even lifestyle clients, it's like they see these obviously bodybuilders and stuff like that on Instagram, all these people that compete on Instagram, and they all have that sort of similar shape at the end of the day, that smaller waist, the sort of slightly broader shoulders and back to create that more of an illusion of an even smaller waist, and then obviously building the glutes up to, again, just, where someone feels comfortable, they feel like they look their absolute best. So again, it all comes down to the client's individual goals and needs there. But quite commonly we'll both of the training splits that I've put towards are similar. Like I don't have a, for example, I don't go push-pull split for guys, and I don't go like an upper-lower split or anything like that for my females. It all depends on what someone's going to enjoy, what someone is going to be able to sort of adhere to and sustain to over a period of time. So I listen to what a lot of my clients sort of say in terms of how they want to structure their training program. It's like, hey, what have you done previously, and what do you enjoy doing? And then I will then incorporate my own, I suppose, techniques and swerve to that, and believe what I'll implement the same amount of volume to a certain exercise, what I believe is going to be beneficial to them. And then we put a obviously progressive overload, I suppose, template to that to allow them to progress to the best of their ability, So like I said, everything's fairly similar. Just you really just try to take as much information as you can from the client's needs, and then you just put in I suppose, my experience into that and try to create the best program I possibly can.
Yeah, 100%. It definitely doesn't change too much. And even funny example of it, just 2 weeks ago, because I do my partner Isaac's training programs as well. And we always kind of, do for our own training programs at the same time. So I wrote his program and then mine was next. And then I pretty much just had the exact same training program for myself. I just swapped out a few different things. I just pretty much swapped out a little bit less chest, added a little bit more glutes, but of course on those certain days, and exactly what you said, it really doesn't vary too much. And of course, Isaac and I being more, advanced with, it's not like for us, if we had a complete, newbie, who, female who's never touched a weight before, maybe they would get a little bit more chest than someone who has already spent a few years doing some chest exercise that really just, they're happy with where they're at. So I think that can definitely be beneficial too. But realistically, yeah, it doesn't change too much. And, even, you and I'm sure, whatever we're trying to say that, like, we do pretty much the exact same, kind of training program. And I think a lot of people get caught up on fancy exercises, but realistically, the more simple that you go when it comes to exercise selection is going to be the best thing that you can do. And then progressive overload is really the most important variable and factor that you can control. So yeah, it definitely doesn't change too much, but yet again, there is definitely quite a few things that do need to be changed. But it's not like this whole new style of training. It's not like we're getting our females to do circuit training whilst we get our guys to do powerlifting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's the cliche behind it. At the same time, that's what I suppose a lot of people have thought, over the back in the day. But again, it depends on what you see on Instagram and social media these days, and that's why it became like that. You might see more females doing circuit training or something on social media, and then all of a sudden you see guys doing powerlifting. And that's where that cliche, I suppose, came in back in the day. But I suppose this is, if we're just specifically sort of focusing on a physique standpoint, then I suppose that's where those sort of changes come in. Or those slight changes that we mentioned. But for example, if we're looking at it from like a performance or like, let's just say a powerlifting background, very minimal difference, if anything, like nothing at all. So if we're looking at just solely from a physique standpoint, then that's where those changes come in. But yeah, like if we're looking at it from performance, barely any changes sort of at all from that sort of point of view. So again, it's just more accommodating to, again, someone's individual goals. And like if we could put both the male and the female on the exact same training program, and if a male obviously sort of like, let's just say they grew a bit more, again, a lot of the time it may be because they might be in a lot more of a surplus, I suppose, than the female is as well too, at the end of the day. So again, a lot of it would come down to nutrition, and that's where you get the questions as well too. It's like, let's just say I have a program sent towards a female, let's just say her partner's training with her or something, for example, but a very similar block too. All of a sudden, she might get in her head, hey, like I don't want to get as big as what he's going to get or how he's going to be. And it's like, no, at the end of the day, our nutrition isn't catered towards that, or isn't it? Or we aren't as much even in surplus, or we're, let's say, hanging around maintenance or in a deficit. That won't occur. And then at the end of the day, the main focus may be just to obviously maintain muscle mass while we're through a deficit phase, or to just build in certain areas. And that's where we may put the volume towards, let's just say, shoulders, glutes, hamstrings, quads. So at the end of the day, I think a lot of people just need to get comfortable, I suppose, in that, in the strength side of things. And more people are these days, obviously, again, because it's all your influencers and Instagram now that you see them all doing, this sort of training. So I think people are starting to understand more, where back in the day, it's like, you told a female to do a bicep curl. No, like, I'm not doing that. I don't want to get big arms,
Mm-hmm.
So I love that. I love that we've sort of come so far in that side of things there. But yeah, just the more, I suppose, we start to talk, the more this episode has basically just sort of been telling everyone, it's like, hey, like there's minimal differences between the two. A lot of it just comes down to the individual goals and where we set someone up in terms of a nutrition point of view. And that's why obviously nutrition is so damn important in making sure that we're fueling performance. If someone's goal is performance or to increase performance in the gym or for a specific sport, it's all going to come down to nutrition at the end of the day, because most of the time, most training blocks will work effectively in terms of either growing or at least maintaining muscle mass. It's just going to come down to how consistent you are with nutrition, right?
Mm-hmm. And a lot of the time, our males feel a lot more comfortable pushing harder in a build phase and in that surplus than a female will, be a lot more inclined to, stay leaner as opposed to, prioritize staying leaner as opposed to gaining muscle. So, and we often can, push those bulk for a lot longer. So it definitely has a lot to do with, the results and the more muscle that we end up building. Do you have anything to touch on that, or do you want to get into a couple of questions that we have?
No, not necessarily at all. Like, I think we've touched enough on that side of things. Like, I'm more than happy to answer any questions though that someone had in terms of difference between the two, because I would like to touch on, like, I suppose why there wouldn't be much of a difference between certain things. So yeah, if anyone had any questions in regards to that sort of thing, just swing us both a message, and just so we can sort of give you that, I suppose, makes you feel comfortable within your training program or within your dieting side of things, or where you're going from there. So yeah, definitely make sure to message us with differences for sure.
100%. And we should definitely do an episode of just a Q&A where people just ask us questions. But we've just got 2 questions here that I want to kind of touch on, and then we've got plenty more topics that we want to talk on as well, as we've already discussed, and then once again we'll do another episode where we can just do a Q&A. But the first question that we have here is biggest mistakes and tips for nutrition around pre and post training. So I already know we're just thinking of the same thing, so I'll touch on a little bit and then you can touch on a little bit. But basically, we really don't want to overcomplicate it too much. I do like to keep, and it depends on what time of the day that you are training as well. I do recommend keeping fats at a minimum, before you do train, because otherwise you're going to tend to feel a little bit sluggish, and it's going to sit in your stomach for a little bit longer. Carbs, protein, yes, but also, there is a research article as well that I do remember having a read through, and it was really quite interesting that the timeline between after training and getting in your next meal is actually within a range of, I believe it was 6 hours. So whilst it can help even just like that 1%, the range of needing to do that, like if you're not eating within 6 hours after your training, like you're probably going to be feeling really, really hungry, and you're going to be starving. So chances are pretty much everyone is going to tend to do that anyway. So I would say it's not as important as you think, but it definitely doesn't hurt to have some more protein and carbohydrates pre and post training. And then just keep your fats a little bit more to the smaller side coming to before your training session. Anything else you'd like to add?
It's just I started laughing because, like, I just remember back in the day when I first started training, and it was all about that, like, anabolic window.
Yeah, 100%. You'd have a protein shake on your way home. Quick.
Yeah. Yeah, if you didn't have your protein powder, like, just after you finished your session, you were like rushing home, just like, oh my god, yeah, I'm gonna look like that. That session was such a waste because I didn't get the protein in during session time. But yeah, like you said, there's definitely some benefits there in terms, because again, like, you have the potential to go catabolic throughout a training session, even if you are lifting weights. So obviously that's where it's important at that period of time to be able to, again, fuel your body. And you've even seen sort of studies too, because we've talked about this in terms of carbohydrates probably become more important than actual protein around training times, both pre and post, just to ensure that we don't, especially being in a deficit, we don't have the chance to be losing muscle anywhere in any stage. And again, most of the time it's in a severe deficit, like you said, 1% chance, but most of the time it's making sure that we're prioritizing carbohydrates pre and post training. I've got like a ritual for myself, like pre-training, because me and one of my mates back in the day just always used to sort of stick by this because it's what I felt was most beneficial. I just used to have a meal 2 hours beforehand. Quite commonly back in the day when I was, in school, it was like tuna and rice, and we'd have that a big chunk of that 2 hours beforehand, getting in a bit of protein, getting in a bit of carbohydrates there. I would always chuck in a tiny bit of fats there, but like I said, I'll keep it minimum. I personally just don't feel the best if I have a large amount of fats pre-workout. So I would normally stick to like sort of tuna, rice, maybe some avocado or something. And then half an hour beforehand, have like a topper. Or I'll have like a bit of fruit, banana or something like that as well too. And then normally about a liter of water about an hour before my session as well too. And this is always something that I've done, and it's what I've felt the best in doing as well too. And then after my session, I'll just, like I said, I'll just sort of plod along, not rush, and I'll have a meal within sort of, an hour, maybe hour and a half of that training time as well. And again, more prioritizing protein intake, carbohydrates, and I'll try make sure I have a mix of fats in there as well too. But it's, again, the meal timing side of things is just not really anywhere near as important as what people used to make it out to be. And I feel like a lot of that was done by the supplement industry back in the day, making sure that people get protein powder because it's like a necessity to get your protein in or to get your whey protein isolated in directly after your training times. So I feel like the supplement industry definitely had a big, I suppose, effect on that. But yeah, for the most part, I feel like that's more the misconceptions. And again, I suppose the pros of trying to get food in around that training time is purely just to make sure that you're performing at your absolute best and you've got enough fuel in there. You already mentioned depends on what time of the day. Quite commonly, I would just say to someone that trains early in the morning, hey, look, if you have the chance to get a bit of fruit or something in before you train or something like that, that'd be great because you're most likely be training and just like it's half an hour after you get up or something, just going straight to the gym. So you can have a decent sized meal the night before. That would be optimal. Easier said than done with someone in a deficit though, right? To try to save all your carbs for end of the day. So yeah, it's all just going to come down to, again, your ability to eat around your training time if you can. Obviously, if it's afternoon, you're not really going to have that much of a procedure because you've eaten plenty throughout the day. So you should be fine in that regard anyway. But yeah, that's definitely the biggest misconception I think around that training time is the protein directly after training. Sometimes even I hear people trying to take protein with pre-workout, like half an hour beforehand taking a protein shake. I'm like, yeah, no.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
most of the time you probably throw it up in your first exercise anyway. So I highly recommend not doing that.
Yeah, 100%. I was going to ask you what your go-to pre-workout meal is, but yeah, tuna and rice. That's honestly
Not
my
that
go-to.
anymore.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Not anymore?
that was easy back in the day.
If I train
Yeah.
like midday-ish, I'll always have tuna and rice. Otherwise, like I normally just train in the mornings now, so I could just a banana. But I just love it. I can eat tuna and rice for breakfast.
Oh, I don't mind it, but I have to chuck a bit of sauce on it these days. I used to eat it plain back in the day.
Yeah,
Used
no,
to have like
I go the
bodybuilding
Yeah, no, I go the cube pie or whatever you call it.
Yeah,
Half fat mayo is the best.
yeah, beautiful.
We've got 8 minutes left in the Zoom, so one last question before we finish up. We have got best tips for someone in the early stages of prep coming into their first show. So working with a coach, making sure that you've got your, this is actually from my client Ash, who has just started her prep. So we've done all of these things, getting herself set up in a, good point in her off season. We've already done a cut together when we first started. We've already done, 7-ish months of building together, getting her calories up to a really high point. No cardio. So best tips would just to be making sure that you're ticking all the boxes, that you've got yourself in the right mindsets, you're doing your posing, you're doing all those non-negotiables. And really, if you've done those things, that's probably going to be the best thing that you can do. I mean, Ash is a machine, so she does everything right. She really does this. Is amazing. Any other particular tips that you want to kind of touch on?
A lot of it's just going to come down from our end. Hey, like
Yeah.
we like if anyone's doing it by themselves, then you probably should be pretty damn knowledgeable at that point. But yeah, a lot of it's going to come down from the coach's end. So I suppose if you had any coaches listening, one of the biggest things that I've focused on throughout anyone sort of, especially the first time, is trying to make the foods quite dense at the start, like trying to eat some pretty calorie dense foods.
Yes.
Just to make sure that like as you go on, you can volumize it more and more because a lot of people have fell in the trap of trying to volumize their food straight away because they're like, hey, look, I'm going to be hungry, so I'm going to get this in advance. All of a sudden, then you sort of start to leave yourself with very little room to actually volumize your foods more and more and more, and then you've already set yourself up to be absolutely starving by the midway through the contest prep.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of the time I've tried to make that quite dense. So like for example, I've opted for quite more sort of like higher fat meats at the start of a prep. Opted for more sort of like pastas and rices and stuff like that. Tried to meet my minimum vegetable requirement, and even included sauces and stuff in too. Because then after that, it's so easy to just go, hey, you feeling hungrier? Cool, let's go to a leaner meat. Let's drop your sauce back. Let's get rid of those liquid calories. Let's swap your pasta and rice for like potato, pumpkin, more vegetables, stuff like that. And it makes it so much easier because essentially at the end of the day, honestly, I believe personally that in my last prep, I was probably eating more food at the end of the dieting phase than I was at the start, but obviously I was way more hungry, right? Because you're in more of a deficit. So it's just definitely a smarter way to do that. And I think that's definitely something that I believe more coaches need to, I suppose, implement if they don't already. But a lot of it's going to come down to, I'm not going to touch on it massively, but a lot of it's going to come down to, obviously, again, just making sure you're in the right mindset, talking to the people around you, making sure that people around you are well on board of what you're doing. They are going to be supportive and they're going to help you out as much as they can. And that's where it's very important, I suppose, to even like I've even done some write-ups for some of my clients to even show people around them too, to sort of understand exactly the whole procedure and what's going to happen. I think for them just to sort of talk about all that to them as well too, just to sort of make sure you have people in your background, because first time competing, I think you know this as well. It's like you don't have anyone really familiar around you with the sport. In some cases, you feel like you're very alone because no one else knows what you're going through. So I think to talk to people about that and have people around you that have done it before, or even talking to someone online who's done it before, makes the biggest difference, because you're like, hey, I'm going through the exact same thing. I feel hungry too, and you can relate in that way. So yeah, that's where I believe that's probably the most important. Those like few things, especially in your first contest prep, and especially in the early stages. If you set the fundamentals up like that well, then smooth sailing all the way through. Obviously, you're still going to experience those few things in terms of hunger, in terms of fatigue. But if you have a expectation that those things are coming, then the whole entire process makes things a lot easier. And then you've got your coach in your corner, basically saying that, hey, look, I've went through this as well too. I know what you're feeling, and we can do this together.
100%. Absolutely. And it's just the most rewarding thing when you complete the prep and you get it done, and provided that you've got all those good things in place. But 100% agreed. And I remember us talking previously, I feel like we've chatted about all of these topics 1,000 times together, just one-on-one, but absolutely, in terms of the food volume trick, and yeah, it just makes such a difference not needing to start off with a full calorie source, swap it for a low calorie source, and then eventually slowly decrease that quantity. And your taste buds do adapt over time, so it does really get a lot easier. But 100% to everything that you said. But I think we've touched on a lot in today's episode. Thank you for all of your insight. You're always a gem to speak to. So and I know everyone's going to love this episode as well, so I'm really, really excited. Do you have anything else to touch on at all in regards to that, or anything?
Not necessarily. I definitely want to hear anybody's feedback on if they have any certain things that they would like to know, especially in regards to differences between, I suppose, the male and female coaching side of things. If they feel like there's anything else, I would love to be able to answer questions there, I suppose, and sort of say why there's not much of a difference. So, yeah, if there's anyone has any questions or anything, just message both me or Jazz, and we'll give you the best advice possible. Or even, like you said, message to sort of see if anyone else has any specific topics they'd like us to talk about, and I'd be more than happy to go through them.
Yeah, we love hearing from you guys, especially because sometimes as coaches, what we talk about on a daily basis, this is also normal to us, and sometimes we forget, what other people want to hear when we, this has been our normal for so long. So any feedback that you guys have or want to hear from us, definitely let us know. My Instagram at Jasmine Fitness, and Shaun's is absoluteathlete_Shaun. But other than that, guys, thank you all so much for listening, and we will see you guys in the next episode.